Hey everybody, welcome back for another game break. So today we have a couple of trademarks from Square Enix, and it seems like they are very likely, more than likely actually, to be, Final Fantasy VII related. So the first one is just the Shinra Electric Power Company logo, No big thing there really, I think. But the other two, is where a lot of the discussion is gonna, happen around today. And that is, the Ever Crisis trademark and the First Soldier trademark. So, this is just, theory talk essentially. This is what I think these could mean, based off what happened in, Final Fantasy VII Remake, okay? There's a lot of theories going around after that game ended. Oh, by the way, huge spoilers in this video, obviously. I think I'm going to title it Theory Talk. So, there's going to be stuff from, Remake proper in this video. So just so you know. So the first title I'm going to talk about is Ever Crisis. So, anyone who's familiar with the compilation of Final Fantasy VII knows we got Before Crisis, which was the prequel game, that took place, many years before the events of Final Fantasy VII took place, and, very much led up to, some key moments just before that game starts. Even though I, never played it, just kind of read about what happened. But I did play Crisis Core, which starred Zack Fair. So based off that, so we got Before Crisis and Crisis Core, obviously Crisis, being the thing they share in common, right? And that they're side games. So we got Ever Crisis here. Now, my natural first gut instinct is this is going to be a side game featuring Zack, right? So why do I think that? Well, obviously at the end of Remake, Zack's alive, and we get hints that he's alive in a new timeline. There's been a split in timelines, essentially, is what has been indicated. And I think that is, fairly general consensus at large. So, the thing everyone's been asking themselves is how the heck are they going to deal with this? How the heck are they going to introduce multiple timelines in a seamless, not too goofy, kind of coherent manner? Because once you start dealing with timelines, I feel things can get really tricky. Like very tricky. So, the one thing, that I had heard or, that I would be on board with is like, maybe us, seeing this other timeline at parts. But by and large, what I think will happen is, part 2 will be very much like part 1. It'll cover the same broad strokes. And I think they've already indicated this in interviews. It'll have the same broad strokes, but things are going to happen in a different order, in different ways, just like part 1 did. And it kept it fresh, it kept it interesting, and also nostalgic at the same time. It was a beautiful blend of both. I loved part 1 for doing that. So I think that's what part 2 is going to do. So a side game would be an excellent way to deal with this, all these, this side timeline, stuff in a way that doesn't affect part 2 so much, right? I feel like it's going to be jarring all of a sudden if in part 2 we're going back and forth between timelines or characters are crossing into timelines. That would be really weird. I think that would be quite odd if we all of a sudden decide to go that route, and I don't think they will. So another thing I did is, I looked up, what's the dictionary definition of ever? What is it at its most basic meaning? So ever has two meanings. Ever means at any time, or it also means at all times. So, key word in there for both, I think, is time, since we might be dealing with timelines again, because, one of the prevailing theories is the Sephiroth we're dealing with is from the future. It's Advent Children Sephiroth, and he's able to enter the life stream and travel time, is one of the theories I've seen. And, I kind of agree with, because playing the game a second time, Aerith knows way more about what's going on than she's letting on. Sephiroth is acting weird. Just like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. A lot of weird dialogue. Marley being touched by Aerith and all of a sudden magically knowing what's going on. There's a lot of indicators that, if Aerith isn't totally out of place, her memories are. She's, sent her memories back through the time stream or something. Through the live stream. So there's weird stuff going on. So, what I think the Ever Crisis title is getting at, is, Before Crisis was before Nibelheim. And Crisis Core, the center crisis was what happened at Nibelheim, because it caused Sephiroth to go crazy and to set all those events in motion. Obviously there were events that happened before that, but Nibelheim is like the moment everything really starts to gain speed and go bad for everybody. So what I think Ever Crisis is going for, so it means at any time or at all times. And what I think it means is, ever since Sephiroth, had the Nibelheim incident, and now that he's in the live stream and it can affect time, the crisis is occurring at all times now. Like literally, like he can travel timelines. So, the crisis is always present. We're past the before crisis. We're past the crux of it. Now the planet's just always in crisis because Sephiroth is, able to, kick it around timelines and just do whatever he wants. So I think that's kind of what they're going for with that title. And I think what's going to happen now is we're going to have a side game with Zack. I think this is where they're going with this. Just, how do they deal with this timeline stuff? This is what makes sense to me. They'll have a side game. So we'll have the main team do the main games. And now obviously we got multiple divisions and, other studios at Square Enix. And we'll have another group do a side game with Zack. And how they're going to do that is anyone's guess. Action game, RPG, card game, like rhythm game, whatever. I'm being facetious, but who knows? So I think that's the best way. And I think, since we got multiple timelines, and I've heard this theory before, since we have multiple timelines now and Sephiroth caused a split in the timelines because of his actions of going back in it. And obviously the Arbinger of Fate is destroyed and all that. Or the Harbinger of Fate. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Sorry for the mid-video costume change. I forgot to hit record on the second part. So I didn't record anything. So I'm just redoing it now because I caught that while I was editing. So anyway, back to it. So, since there's multiple timelines now, since Sephiroth, has come back through the live stream and he started, all this, this tomfoolery with the timelines. And we know there's a second one because of Zack surviving in his, there needs to be most likely a convergence at one point. And the first person I, remember hearing talk about this convergence stuff was, Maximilian dude on his channel. And that does make a lot of sense because they're not just going to introduce Zack and just, have them probably never meet or have the timelines obviously never converge at any point. So I think that is, definitely a solid argument. And I think an excellent point for the timelines to converge at least once, I feel like it'll happen probably more than once, is Nibelheim. Nibelheim is the site of so much trauma and, painful emotion and just tragedy. It is a natural, I think it's a natural choice for, a timeline convergence. So I feel like the side game will do its own thing and it will lead to a convergence point at Nibelheim. And that leads me to, the second trademark, The First Soldier. If this is indeed the title of, part 2, which I think it very much could be, it makes a lot of sense. The First Soldier, it's obviously talking about Sephiroth. It's not just Soldier First Class, it's the First Soldier, which Sephiroth was. And, I've been thinking, where would be a good stopping point for part 2? Because part 2 is not going to cover the rest of the story. We already know that. And I feel like I've seen that tossed around in some places, and I feel like that is very incorrect. So, I think Nibelheim is a good stopping point. I thought maybe we get to Wutai, but oof, that's a lot of material to cover. But Nibelheim is an obvious choice. There's, it's a high point of the story. We get more backstory into Cloud and Tifa and, Sephiroth himself. And we're just coming off of the events of, Barrett's backstory as well, which was another high moment. So, Nibelheim is a great place to end the story again because you could have, an epic finale to the game there, and they can make it even more crazy and even more, full of emotion than it already is, which is what they, did for part 1. They took key moments and just, turned the dial up on it and up the ante. And I feel like that's very much what they could do with part 2. So I think Nibelheim, could very much be the final destination of part 2. And, it would make sense, to fall in line with maybe where this theoretical Ever Crisis project goes. I feel like Ever Crisis could, lead to Nibelheim or finish Nibelheim, and very much part 2 could, and we can have a convergence of some kind there. And in terms of what that convergence looks like and what transpires there, who knows? But no, I think that is, that is my theory. I feel like Ever Crisis is probably a side project featuring Zack in his timeline, and The First Soldier is quite possibly the subtitle of part 2, and they will meet at the very end of the second game. But what happens after that, who knows? Do they meet and do they, converge completely, or do they, meet for a bit and then, unconverge again? Which is what I think will probably happen. Because, they need to handle this definitely in a good way. Because a lot of people like me, like being a hardcore fan of the original, I definitely want to cover a lot of the same story beats and just have the dial cranked up on those a little bit, right? To make them even more special. But yeah, it's anyone's guess. But anyway, thanks for joining me for this theory talk, guys. What do you think, these trademarks mean? And man, I'm looking forward to getting some new information. I don't know about you, but whoo. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this game break. I'll talk to you later.